Hello, welcome to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I'm with Pete Lee. The election results in Chile's runoff of Chile's presidential elections are, of course, now in. We have a winner. Pete, could you just remind us what the result was and give us some figures?
Well, probably contrary to most of the predictions that we've made, we have made a lot of predictions. The result was not close at all. Boric ended up winning by over 10%. He got 4.6 million votes, a huge number. There's 15 million people on the electoral roll, not all of them living. And Cast only got 3.6 million, which is quite a lot anyway, but certainly he was nowhere near competitive effectively.
So an absolute giant difference, you know. Now we came rather close to kind of saying that Cast was looking good to win, didn't we? We came very close actually. So obviously, you know, completely wrong there. We thought there were a lot of shy Cast voters. There don't seem to have been, but a lot of people came out for Boric. And I mean, what do you think about that, Pete? You know, what happened?
Well, a lot of new voters have come out, well over 1 million, 1.2 million perhaps is a figure I've seen, of new voters voting for the first time in, at least in a second round of a presidential election. And of course, many more voters than the 7.1 million who voted, over 1.2 million more than voted in the first round with 7 candidates. Boric got a lot more votes than he did the first time. A lot more, 2.5 million more, almost.
I think
less.
that's it. I guess a reading of this could be, you know, because although we were very far from predicting the result, in earlier episodes where we've touched on many things, one's always right some of the time, you know, I expressed kind of some surprise that there hadn't been a Boric before, that there hadn't been somebody offering to whack up taxes, create a welfare state. You know, Chile's had this supposedly neoliberal model from which you get the idea it's kind of cutthroat competitiveness. Now, is the economy one of cutthroat competitiveness, Pete? Would you say lots of firms competing strongly against each other?
Well, no, it's a fairly much a kind of cadre capitalism in many respects. It's a smallish market, a medium-sized market. One of the big sort of mythoses, I guess, mythoi in Chile is that neoliberalism was installed in the late 70s, early 80s. And this was a petri dish or laboratory of neoliberalism for the world, and Thatcher and Reagan were watching closely. The story goes back way before that to the 1950s, really the post-Korean War collapse in the mid-1950s, 1953. And what in West Germany had successfully been formulated as ordoliberalism was translated into Spanish as neoliberalismo, and ever since then the evolving economic model at most times has been called neoliberalismo, which is often literally translated back to English as neoliberalism, and it's a cause of great confusion because obviously so many changes happened, even if we're just talking about the 1980s, so many changes happened at the end of the 1980s after the disastrous recession from 1982 to 1985. And then so many changes happened after the return to electoral rule in 1990, such that qualitatively the model changed a lot. It's not the same model running through time.
Yeah, but one thing that has been a constant is that it's a small country where the people at the top all know each other, and it's not really cutthroat, neoliberal, whatever capitalism at all. It's actually rather cozy. There's a lot of cartels. stuff is expensive, you know, and it's just, yeah, it's not that at all. There's a quote I value from an American economist, Jude Wanniski, who said that if you don't give people capitalism, they'll take socialism. You know, if you don't give people, you know, competitive markets, high growth, the stuff that capitalism brings you, then they're going to want a welfare state, you know, and a more pleasant life, you know. And so the question, you know, Chile, we've touched on this. Chile's a very unpleasant place to be a low earner. I mean, let alone unemployed, because there's no unemployment. There was never been any unemployment benefit. If you were a low earner, you were paying compulsory 7% in contributions towards the health system, compulsory 10% towards your personal pension, plus some other charges. You know, that's tax. You know, these, okay, there's a personal pension fund, but it's compulsory. It's a tax. You know, in developed countries, very low earners don't pay tax. Essentially, they don't pay any tax. You know, so it was such an unpleasant place to be a low earner. Wages were so low. You think, you know, this was the question. People weren't given capitalism. They weren't given strong growth. You know, quickly rising earnings. Why didn't they take socialism before now?
Well,
I just think they just didn't believe it was possible. There was a mental block, and I think in the second round it came to this runoff between Kast and Boric, and suddenly people realised actually, yeah, they could vote for the socialist. This wasn't some kind of pipe dream. The army wasn't necessarily going to step in.
Well, Chile has had a long love affair with the word socialist, just as it's had a long suspicion of the word neoliberal. And, you know, there was a small adventure during the 1930s called the Socialist Republic of Chile that I think lasted, I don't know, 16 days or something like that, under effectively Marmaduke Grove, the founder of really the socialist movement. Of course, Salvador Allende is often celebrated as being a great socialist, even though he was so hamstrung in power that what he was doing wasn't exactly the implementation of socialism either. And we have this word. Boric doesn't seem to use it too much. He uses simply the social, which has another angle to it. And Boric obviously is a sworn enemy of neoliberalism, but I've never heard him say that he's a sworn enemy of capitalism. So perhaps he can embrace capitalism anyway.
So he's been careful not to condemn capitalism and not to say he's a socialist. You know. I don't know. He did seem, I don't know. He looked as if he matured during the campaign. I thought, you know, is this possible? He might grow into the job. You know, he looked quite diplomatic, quite skilled. I thought in those last days.
He seems to have a lot. He's got better advice from all manner of directions. People are helping him, including his, you know, sometime opponents, such as Kast, very graciously conceded and made it clear that he's on Boric's side. Piñera, the current president, who's basically a hermit, said he's very keen to help with a smooth transition. I think Chileans they're sick of any sort of conflict with one another.
So it's possible, it's actually thinkable, this could all be a success, isn't it? I mean, because, you know, we've seen the expected market reaction, okay? The peso has fallen to now just about an all-time low against the dollar within a kind of reasonable, meaningful frame of reference, the last 20 years or so. It did fall in the early stages of coronavirus, when the dollar went very strong against a lot of currencies. But that was just a global effect. But as it's now fallen back to those levels, getting towards 900 pesos to the dollar, which is very low. So, you know, clearly the market's very cautious about this Boric government, but it's now possible to think it might actually be successful, you know, if with all this goodwill around. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a potentially powerful force. There are so many confounding factors in the economy at the moment, not least coronavirus and the current Omicron variant. Nobody knows what's going on with China and the United States and various other forces. Lots of things are against the Chilean peso because the dollar is a safe currency that you flee to in difficult times. So there are sources of goodness in Chile that can be unlocked with enough, solidarity and goodwill.
And so the big problem everybody's saying is that Boric's team, his economics team, is kind of well, Sebastian Edwards, who's a well-known economist, including in the States, suggested, but he's Chilean, suggested that Boric has been bringing more experienced economists onto his team, but they're not central to it in the way that they were. We must now speak in the past tense to Kast's team. Kast brought in some quite heavyweight economists, and they were central to his team. And Boric, not. And what he's proposing is going to have to be very skillfully executed, isn't it, if it's going to work?
Yes, we'll have to see. But Boric does seem genuinely open-minded about such things. He probably hadn't put much thought into running a country prior to a month ago, when I just assumed he didn't really want to run it yet, and maybe he'd like to spend the next 4 years becoming more viable. Well, he has become viable, at least in the eyes of the people. He won over the centre. Kast probably helped him out a little bit by a few Pinochet and Nazi-themed slip-ups, which allowed the circulation of this idea that Kast is a fascist, which is unfortunate, but it happens. And now it's an interesting scenario. A lot of people have voted for Boric. I think most people accept Boric's mandate, obviously.
So including even himself. I mean, I was just thinking, like, what awakenings in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. for him when he realized he was actually going to be president, and it wasn't all just like some kind of like game or a bit of fun. But he seems to, but he comes out and he looks like he's ready for it. I mean, it's
it looks good. It looks good enough. I mean, a fairly sort of telegraphed victory speech, hitting all the notes, without the authentic grandeur of a statesman. But he's young and he's got better at that as well. He's making less sort of Orientalist gestures with his hands and that sort of thing. Expectations are spread far and wide throughout the society, basically because he's offered different things to different people, and nobody's cross-checked what he's going to be able to deliver to different people. I don't think anyone's got particularly high expectations, simply because we've been through such hard times and the outlook's not looking great either. The one single big ticket make or break thing that he's got to get done is to help the Constitutional Convention confect a constitution that can be passed. And if you look at them at the moment, they're not on track to do that. They'll need a lot of help.
It's a bit of a circus, isn't it, as we've discussed? And they, of course, will listen to him. He's like one of them, as they will see it.
Yes, I think it can be a very benign relationship. Obviously, when the Constitution does come up for ratification by plebiscite, the standard promotional package will say, do you want the Constitution of Pinochet or do you want a new Constitution? Now, if the Constitution is bad enough, they'll say, well, we don't want the Constitution of Pinochet, but we want something better than this. They do have to come up with something reasonably plausible, and they're not close to that yet, and the procedures they have in place to write the Constitution aren't looking great either.
And that could be a good outlet for his energies, partly as well because Congress is divided, isn't it? He won't command the votes in Congress for really radical measures necessarily.
Well, that could be a very good check and or balance, having a more balanced Congress, particularly given that the Constitutional Convention, is heavily populist in makeup, and quite low on technical capacity on the populist side. So
that's right, and of course, having a split, divided Congress is also a good reason for him not to be able to get much done if he should need an excuse. So I don't know. There are reasons to think that this government might not change the country as quickly or drastically as perhaps a lot of people are hoping and a lot of people are fearing.
Well, there isn't so much pressure on them either. Now, of course, we'll have to go into another, we'll have to go in via another Chile talk into this issue, but in the government that he puts together and the cabinet, the ministers of the different ministries, well, the first question a lot of people have is how much Communist Party probably gave him 500,000 votes, but he won by so many votes that he didn't need those votes. So it's going to be, the Communist Party is the largest party in the Pueblo Dignidad coalition, which is Boric's coalition that's just won, with a lot of help from other groups as well. Probably there'll be some communist ministers, and at least one important ministry will probably be run by a communist. Might be the younger generation of communists who don't seem particularly ideological. They're sort of celebrity-based rather than ideologically based. And some of those are quite telegenic. And he's also got to think about how much ex-Concertación, these old folks who were running the place apparently terribly for the 20 years after 1990, who have helped him out, particularly on moderating this economic program, how much of them he's going to accept. And of course, another issue, well, there's two. There's how much of his mate, Giorgio Jackson, who's the head of another sub-party of Pueblo Dignidad, Revolución Democrática, how much of him he's going to have, because maybe it's a good idea to rest his brand a little bit, rest the Jackson brand and burn the Boric brand bright, or maybe not, maybe have a duumvirate. And then of course there's Iskia Sitges, the highly talented independent centre leftist, former head of the medical college, who's in her early 30s, and I think will one day be president, possibly in 4 years.
So very interesting. I mean, he, having won such a crushing victory, he can very plausibly put it. I mean, I advanced a theory earlier that it's a lot of people came out to vote who hadn't believed that, such a government was possible and suddenly started to believe in it. But that's just a hypothesis, of course. I don't have an insight into their minds really. And a more perhaps obvious theory is that he did attack to the centre heavily. He'd said that he made it clear that he thought that extreme sort of left-wing positions had gifted votes to caste. And so he can now very plausibly say, I moderated my discourse and look, we got a huge victory. And that should allow him to put the communists, because people have been talking about 4 or 5 ministers, I think, for the communists.
But sounds like a lot.
Yeah, but we'll see. He might feel his hand is stronger. He's very strongly placed. I mean, this is clearly a victory for him personally, isn't it? I'd say yes. His coalition's pretty unwieldy, and it's a mixture. This is his victory.
It's an impressive victory. Very impressive. Yeah. And there's so many threads that we'll have to return to, including the makeup of any ministry that he's shopping around, but we'll have to see as more information becomes available to us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is just our first take on the election results and backtracking on some near predictions we made, being slightly wise after the event. We'll be returning to these subjects, and apologies for some slightly shaky sound quality. I think, but I think people who watch this series are used to that, and hope to see you again next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. It all makes sense.
It all makes sense. The universe is perfect. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.